Welcome to the Communication 24/7 podcast, where we communicate about how we communicate. I'm your host, Jennifer Furlong. I have a special guest with me today, Robin Lukason. She is an executive business coach. I asked her to be on the podcast because she and I met. We are co-authors in a book called Cracking the Rich Code. And you've heard me talk about this book before. So I was really lucky in that I happened to be in this same book as Robin. And so we decided, hey, let's have a little chat, just to get to know you. And we ended up hitting it off, and we had so many things in common. And our conversation lasted a very long time. So finally, I was like, we need to get this onto the podcast because we talked all things communication. And I really think she has a lot of really insightful things to say about communication and relationships and things that we can do in order to improve our communication skills. So, Robin, thank you so much for being on the show. I'm so happy to see you again.
Thank you, Jen. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah. So why don't we get the audience caught up? Because you and I have already had great conversations, but they need to get caught up on where we are. So do you mind just tell us a little bit about, I know you started your own business not too long ago, but catch us up to the career you had before you started your business and how that helped you make the decision to go the path that you're on now.
Sure. So I like to refer to myself affectionately as a corporate dropout. I spent 26 years in mortgage banking. All of my background is running operations, so sites across the United States and even partners overseas. And then the last probably 6 to 10 years, I really started to focus on more strategic efforts. So I would be in a chief of staff role. I started getting really involved with financial partners, so P&L, building comp plans, working with the sales partners, really chief of staff type work. So the operations leaders could do what they needed to do, and I could work behind the scenes, having been in roles like them. I also spent a lot of time in data and performance management. I live my life by Excel. I love organization, so it was a great fit. And about 3.5 years ago, when I was working at my last corporate job, I got connected with a woman who ran a mortgage and real estate coaching firm out on the East Coast. So she was based out there. She was an ex-sales leader. Got connected to her. I immediately became a coach. And every coach wears a certain hat, if you will. So everybody specializes in some area. So I became the relationship coach. And not necessarily to work on personal relationships, but just how you build relationships in the workplace. And working corporate, I could only really moonlight. So I did hours from 4 to 7. And I found that even after the longest days, so mind you, this is March of 2020, I'd started a new job and started coaching right when the world went sideways.
Right.
And I was working
a lot going on.
I was working 10 to 12 hours a day and then coaching at night. And what I found was that was what really energized me. I felt better after those sessions than just about anything I was doing in corporate. All those years, I was unofficially coaching people. I've had hundreds of leaders under me that I've helped and worked with and developed. So I was already doing it unofficially. This was just the first chance I got to be in the role. And I really fell in love with it. So when the mortgage market really started to have challenges in 2022, I was laid off. And I thought to myself, I was going to wait 2.5 more years to pursue this full time when my son graduated high school. But I felt like this was the right time. So last summer, I decided to, in tandem, I still work for that firm. I pursued my own business, and that's what I'm working to grow right now as an executive coach.
That is fantastic. You know, one of the things that as an executive business coach, and I think with your background in the mortgage industry and being so much of a chief of staff, really, as a chief of staff, you really do have to deal with all kinds of different personalities. You have to really see the big picture and how the different pieces of the puzzle can fit together. What do you think was the most challenging part of all of that as you were figuring out, yeah, you know what, I'm doing more of the relationship management, type of things. What was challenging about that for you?
The hardest thing you learn when you are a leader and you have to partner with others is the concept of managing through influence. And so, I'm in a VP type role, if you will, and I have a really small team of people that are working under me and partnering with the business. But I'm facing off with all the senior VPs and the C suite as either the ambassador for my boss or running my own initiatives. And so, building relationships with all of those people for them to understand my credibility and my experience. As we used to have this saying, right? You don't walk into rooms guns blazing and telling everybody what you want to do. It's a slow burn to introduce yourself, share what you've done, and it takes time.
Mhm.
And so it's, sitting back and listening for a while, not being the first one to speak. And that's a hard thing for me sometimes, right? The thoughts in my head. So it was really working to build relationships. And in the beginning, I would reach out and set up 30-minute calls with a lot of these peers and partners before I ever had to work with them.
Mm.
More to understand what their role was, how long they've been with the company, what had they done before. Professionally, it was important to me to know what their role was, where they had challenges, how we might be able to partner. But I tend to ask a few personal questions if I feel like it's the right environment. The company I was working for was based in my home state, in the town where I went to college. So I'm very familiar with the area. So I knew where a lot of people lived. We had this commonality of geography. So we could start there. And then it's, children and pets and hobbies. And you just start to slowly build rapport. And the next time you talk to them, I think it's always important to remember things that people told you about their personal life. And so it was really just working to build that relationship, offering my help as much as possible, getting involved in as many things as I could so I could really understand the corporate culture, the landscape of responsibilities. And when I started to offer help, so either help them on something or offer some expertise, that started to build the bond. And then people got to understand what I was capable of.
Right.
And then I didn't have a shortage of work. Let's just say that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm sure it was something that was sorely needed. I think a lot of people, especially in corporate America, they're almost starving for a way to be able to make connections with others. I think we all feel so disconnected now. And, we could blame social media, we could blame having to work from home, especially during the pandemic. There are so many different things that are competing for our attention.
Mhm.
And I've heard from a lot of people who work in the workforce going into the office, on a daily basis, even though you're in there and you get to see people, it's easy to feel somewhat disconnected from them, especially if you are uncomfortable or maybe you don't know how to have those conversations. And I'm sure there's a cultural component to it as well, as far as, leadership modeling that type of openness and willingness to have those types of conversations to build those relationships. Did you have any conversations with the higher echelon to let them know that you were doing this, you were having these one-on-ones and having these conversations to build the relationships? Or did you just kind of say, you know what, I know this is the right thing to do, so I'm going to do it now, rather than ask permission?
It's interesting. I felt like when I was brought in, I was introduced as someone that had a lot of expertise in the industry. And my boss was really good at giving me that initial ground cover and really punting a lot of things. Robin can do it. Robin can do it. And I was, brand new to the company. Mm-hmm. But some of those C-suite leaders were some of the people that I really pursued having conversation with. So they were part of that as well. When they found out some of the things I could do, and then they started to come to me, I would try to do the same things, try to build that rapport, understand about them. What can I help them with? Because to me, the more minds you get in the room without, getting too big because then there's too many opinions.
Right.
Those differences are really important when you make decisions.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes people get nervous when outsiders come in because they're worried we're going to change the culture or the decision paths we've been on will be disrupted. And it was really, my belief has always been, let's just share different perspectives and let's land on the best one, whoever it is.
Mm.
And some people are really open to that, and others, it takes them a little more to realize, the whole concept of someone being a threat to your job. So that's one you always want to overcome. So I found that when I would start to detect people that would potentially omit you from a meeting or don't want your opinions, those are the ones I work harder to let them understand. My runway for work is not, 25 years, and I'm trying to build more steps in my ladder. I'm completely content where I am. I'm here to help you achieve your goals and let some of my experiences be a good guide for you. 26 years is a long time to be in management.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's why it's helped me as a coach. If I can help other people avoid some of the missteps I've had, then, that's success in my book too.
Yeah. Do you ever have conversations with leadership or even just managers in how they can also use this as a way to connect with their employees? Do you talk to them about having one-on-ones and the importance of that?
That is literally, not to little tongue in cheek here, one of my number one things I tell people when I meet them is, what are your rhythms and routines with your team? So whether you are a first line manager, a manager of other leaders, there's multiple checkpoints, in my opinion. So you take just a manager that's maybe got 10 or 12 people. I always was a fan of a little huddle in the morning, 15 minutes, set the day. What were the results from yesterday? What's the tone for today? And once a month, is it possible to spend 15 minutes or 20 with each of your team? Because getting to know them on a personal level that is not attached to a problem, which is generally when you bring people to your cube or in your office, it's just, let's talk. What do you like about working here? What could we do differently? And walk the floor. If you are in the kind of environment where you're able to be out and be seen every day, that's so important. And when you get to management level and you've got different layers of managers underneath you, I used to meet with my managers once a week if I could, or at least once, every 2 weeks. So twice a month.
Mm-hmm.
And we have our list of things they want to work on. We have the list of things that I've got, but it always starts with the personal. And I think the thing that made me different as a leader, and one thing I like to coach about, is at the end of a lot of my sessions, once we got to know each other, I would ask them, what do you wish I did more of? And what do you wish I did less of?
Mm.
And initially, people are concerned to share a criticism, right, of their boss to their face.
Right.
But when you build the trust and the rapport, they can say, I hate those follow-up emails about that same topic every day. Or I hate when you stop by my desk when I first walk in the door. Whatever it is, right?
That's right.
And I always I will do my best to accommodate, because everybody needs to be managed differently. So one-on-one time, not just to talk about business results, but just the person, that makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah. And I think there are so many leaders who are action oriented, and they can be so focused on the next goal, what it is that we're working toward. This is the mission. I see exactly where we need to be. So these are all the things that we need to put in place. Go, 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 go. Let's go for it. And it's really easy to forget to make time for those things. So you recommend, just once a month for about a half an hour, have those personal conversations, just kind of get to know you and how's it going?
Yep. And it's follow-up more about how their time is going in their job. What is happening with the peers and partners they work with? Do they like the dynamic on the team? And sometimes if they are comfortable, you can ask them about their relationship with their manager. If this is something like a manager that's starting to talk to staff on the floor. And I think that is one thing that I have watched over and over again in companies as senior leaders rise through the ranks. Their ability to stay connected to the front lines whatever the job is, whether it's customer service, manufacturing, mortgage. I understand how busy we can get, but even when I had sites of a couple hundred people, it was important to me to connect to people every day, because who knows better about making decisions and what is happening than the people that are doing the job every day.
Mm-hmm.
And their voice matters. And, you know, if you've got multiple layers of management between yourself and the front line, people manage up, right? They tell you what they think you need to know. And so
Right.
you, as a senior leader, you sometimes can be missing critical information.
If you are feeling stuck or disappointed with where you are personally or professionally, and you want to level up your life, then I have a book for you. It's called Cracking the Rich Code and is a #1 Amazon International bestseller. I, along with a group of diverse experts from around the world, have teamed up to provide you with powerful strategies and insights that will help you achieve greater success. This book offers some valuable entrepreneurial insights that will strengthen your life, your business, and your effectiveness overall. Use the code podcast and get a 20% discount when you order from my website, www.communication247.com. It helps to smooth out the conflicts that are inevitably going to happen in the workplace. I mean, we're a bunch of people getting together. At some point, there's going to be a disagreement. Somebody's going to say something that somebody else didn't like, or you're going to do something that steps on their toes. You know, we can't help it. Sorry, the human animal, we are prone to conflict. You know, we all have different likes, dislikes, you know, ideals and beliefs. And so being able to establish those relationships, I think, is so important, because down the road, when the conflict does happen, and it's going to happen, I think it just makes it a little more, it just helps smooth the way a little more, so that you can have those difficult conversations that you're going to have. You got to build that trust in order for that to happen. That's so critical. Mm-hmm.
I have a funny story. I had a friend here yesterday for the 4th of July, and she was a manager that worked for me at one point. She was here with her husband, and we were, you know, just kind of catching up on things. She's still in the industry. She made a funny comment to her husband about one of the biggest lessons that she'd learned from me as a leader was know your audience. You have, you know, you've got to be really cognizant of how casual you want to speak and who is sitting in that room, you know? Yeah. And she said, I remember being called to the principal's office once or twice. But she said it has served me so well. And I think you're very right that when you've built the relationship, difficult conversations don't have to be difficult. I mean, as leaders, when you write people up, or when you have to address behavior, or any of those tense things that can happen, I never felt like those were difficult conversations to have. I'm not saying I didn't get nervous once in a while.
Yeah.
But I felt like I was really good about setting expectations and touching base, so that if we get to a point where things are really going sideways, you're not surprised. You've known all along. We've offered you all the solutions. You know, the ball's in your court. So how do we help you get there?
Yeah.
So it doesn't have to be tense.
I'm so glad that you said it doesn't mean that I'm not nervous when those conversations happen. Can you say a little more about that? Because it sounds like it's the preparation. If you've set the expectations, and, you know, you really do want to set them up for success. So the expectations and how to get there is so critically important. But yet you still can get nervous at having those conversations. Were there things that you would do to kind of work through those nerves? Because I know there are a lot of leaders out there in managers who really just, they absolutely loathe having to have these conversations with their employees.
You know, it's funny. I can think back to so many times when people needed to be put on a warning or performance improvement plan, or even a termination. And I always felt like those were the reasons building relationships was so important, because if we got to that place, the first time they're seeing me wouldn't be when we're sitting across from the table from one another and I'm about to walk them out the door. I never would want that to be the experience of people that work with me. You know, unfortunately, part of the solve is it takes time, and you have to sort of hone your craft. What always worked for me to your point about being prepared was, does everybody know what's expected of them before we get to conversations of you aren't meeting expectations or you're falling way below? What do they already have in their possession? What do they already know? Like, let's make sure the playing field is level for everybody and that we've given them a few fair conversations before we're getting to something more permanent that's going to be on the record, let's say.
Mhm.
So by the time you're actually sitting with somebody, we've had some informal conversations. They are aware. You've offered things to them. What more can I do to help you? Is it training? Is it, do you want to shadow somebody? Is it, do you need to like go into the lab? Whatever it is, it's having all your ducks in a row. And I think the thing for me is not only we've got the baseline of conversations, we always have to document things because that's always important for our HR partners. To me, it was just staying calm. And I will say your tone, the pace at which you talk, and your body language are so important when you're talking to anybody for that matter, but especially in tense situations.
Mhm.
I found I can speak fast when I get excited and happy. And I was very calm going in. I lowered my voice and I really slowed down. And I had dialogue with a lot of these people like, okay, so here's why we're here today. These are things we've talked about before. You know, now, unfortunately, here's where it was just, it's a very calm environment because people are so nervous when you tap them on the shoulder or you call them unexpectedly or you put a time on their calendar that they weren't expecting to meet with their boss, you know, all the different ways that you can get surprised. So it's sort of, I don't want to say disarming because I'm not trying to trick them, but it's for me. And then what I taught others was just how these are people. So let's just be sensitive, do the right things up until this point, and just let them always know that they are in control. It's their ability and resources to either improve or here's what's going to happen.
Yeah, you said something so important there, talking about being aware of your own emotions and how that is going to impact the way you're communicating. You know, that's going to impact that message that they're receiving, right? The message you send may not necessarily be the message received. So being mindful of that and just pausing for a moment and recognizing, putting a label to how am I feeling in this moment? Because I know if I don't take a deep breath, calm things down a little bit. And like you said, you know, you can speak a little more slowly, which is going to give you the opportunity to think about what you are going to say next.
Yes.
Yeah. And it just kind of deflates the situation just ever so slightly. Little things like that can have a huge impact on the outcome of those types of conversations. So while you're recognizing how are my emotions having an impact on how I'm communicating, I think it's equally as important to think about the other person and how might their emotions in this moment impact how they're communicating with me. Because if they're hearing something that's not going to be comfortable, you know, they're having to listen to this and take it in. It's not going to be very surprising if they snap back or if you feel like you detect a little tone, you know, in their voice. Yeah. Yeah.
And that's also why you come prepared with evidence, information, things that are irrefutable. And again, it's always trying to make somebody feel comfortable. And how can we solve this? Like coming from the mindset of we want to fix this and work with you and improve things. We're not trying to take the steps for a negative exit. But I will tell you something else funny. When I think about tone and volume, it has served me well in settings where it's really senior leadership too. Because if I'm talking too fast or I say too much and I love details, I can watch eyes just sort of get glazed over, right? So it's to the point, concise. I keep my tone slow and, you know, lower there too to keep attention. So I feel like it's worked in situations that can be tense, but also we talk about reading the audience and what they need and how I can get them to listen to what I want them to hear too.
Yeah. Did you ever, in your time when you're having all of these conversations, I know you spent a lot of time with leadership. Were you ever in a position where you were able to coach employees on how to communicate effectively upwards so that they can position themselves in order to just get themselves into a position where they would be considered, for a promotion or, anything in the workplace to have the leadership notice them, if you will.
I think that's, when I think back to my first company, I spent the first 11 years of my career at one company. And I tell a story in my chapter in the book, actually, about a gift I got from one of the managers. She was on my team, but it was a little jar that had on the front written therapy fund. And it was sit on my back table because people always would pop into my office and sit in that extra chair and ask for advice. And it really started with my team, in mortgage, when you're trying to deal with difficult decisions and difficult transactions with your sales partners and banking partners. And that's where it initially started with, how do I type this email? How do I respond to it was coaching on language that in written form would be received well.
That's right.
Or how do I talk to this person? They're so angry. Help me diffuse the situation. Mm-hmm. But then I started to have other leaders from other departments come and pop in and talk to me about their problems too. And it could be similarly, I'm having challenges with my boss. As an executive coach, I've coached people that are really challenged with the relationship with their boss and talking about whether it be same sex or opposite sex, there's different dynamics that happen there, different personalities, and working with people of the opposite sex, you have to think about potentially how you're going to talk to them, people of the same sex. And there's office politics and just general politics. So I think often if I knew their managers, it was definitely a lot easier for me to help guide them and teaching them to work on emotional intelligence, which I didn't know that phrase up until a few years ago. I think my instincts and how to read people and to manage myself, I didn't know it had a formal name, but it's something I think I started dialing into, which helped me in my relationship building and coach others about, this guy doesn't like to sit and talk for 30 minutes. If you want his attention, these are the steps you should probably take. Or this guy goes and gets coffee every morning at 10:15. If you're trying to catch him, pop into the coffee. It's always like help me help you, like help me get some information or some intel, or I will share with you what I know. And then we can start to make a plan on how to get you where you want to go.
Pay attention. Pay attention to what everybody is doing. And thank you for highlighting that there are, not everybody has the same communication style. This is what I talk about when I go into organizations and work with teams. Are different communication styles. This person may not be the people-oriented communication style. And you're right. They don't want to spend 30 minutes talking about how little Jimmy did in his soccer game last weekend. It's just, and it's not that that's bad. I mean, there's no good or bad to the different communication styles. It's just different. So if you do know that this person is more action oriented, and like earlier you said, to the point, give them the conclusion first, right? your best 2 or 3 points that you want to highlight and be done with it. Maybe provide a visual, because I know action oriented people love charts and graphs, and they can see it right there on one screen. But it's really helpful to really learn your coworkers and the boss and everybody who's a part of this organization. Because if you do end up having to have, some type of a communication with them, you're going to be able to get a lot farther with them if you can adapt to their communication style. And I think that's incredibly important, in building relationships. You seem like you're probably more of the people-oriented type of communication style. Did you ever feel at any point that you were overwhelmed with everybody coming into your office and sharing, especially early on when you didn't realize that this was the path you were going to go on? I'm sure at the very beginning, you weren't like, yeah, one day I'm going to be an executive business coach. And this is kind of by practice to get to that
Yeah.
point. Did you ever get overwhelmed with sometimes like, oh, I just can't have one more person walking into my office and sharing something with me. I'm too much overloaded.
It's funny. For me, it was more about balancing. I have things I need to get done. As much as I would love to sit and help everybody, I still had things to do. And, mortgage banking is a very intense industry. We always joke it's either drinking through a fire hose or, it's drip, drip, and you wonder if you're going to have a job. And most of my career were 12-hour days or 10-hour days. I should also note I'm not an early bird at all. I'm not the kind of person that would come into the office really early to get a head start. I'd rather stay late. But I did adopt a practice early on where I would try to just make at least the first 45 minutes of my day about what I needed to get done to set my day up for success. It was difficult as a leader to walk into like, hey, Robin, can you do this? I need help. I need your signature. Like, wow, that was difficult for me. And I had to talk to my team and just say, I will be available to you at any point after this time. Please just give me this space. And boundaries are a word that I feel like are coming up a lot in my one-on-one coaching sessions right now. People feeling comfortable to state what their boundary is or offering solutions when somebody is encroaching on their boundary. The energy thing is something that is also new for me. So in terms of overwhelm, while I'm really good at creating boundaries, I have found since I've slowed down in my business life and I'm not, chained to conference calls and work output and spreadsheets, a lot of energy I'm able to pick up on at like empathically. And so I have started to observe in crowds and lots of people, I do pick up a lot of energy there and I work to manage mine, which is a very new phenomenon for me. I felt like I always had good instincts, intuition, and I feel like my intuition has bumped up to another level, probably because I'm tapping into all these new parts of my brain that I wasn't using.
Yeah, I think it's really easy for anyone in the workplace because it's kind of ingrained in our culture, right? It's work, 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 all these long days, and we just go, go, go. And it's really easy to mistaken working a lot for being productive, and it's also easy to mistake working a lot or always being accessible with being seen as a good leader or as a good manager. A lot of people are uncomfortable with asserting themselves, though. If there's something has come up, okay, I got to drop what I'm doing and deal with this. And that's not always the case. How do you help managers and leaders become comfortable with setting those boundaries? Because that is a critical piece, I think, in being an effective leader. Just like you said, okay, guys, guess what? Just give me my 45 minutes when I get in the door, and I'm going to be a much better person to answer all of your questions. After that, I think that was probably incredibly effective for your team, for them to know that. How do you build that sense of confidence to be able to say that to begin with? If you've read my book, Cracking the Rich Code, you know it is chock full of fantastic advice from top thought leaders and super successful entrepreneurs from around the world. How would you like to be a member of an exclusive community that provides that same how-to content from those same leaders? What if you were able to attend member-only live events and interact with them? I'd like to invite you to join the Rich Code Club. It will change the way you think about yourself, your money, and your life. It's the only social media platform purely focused on helping you grow. Join the Rich Code Club today for free by clicking on the link in the show notes.
I think there's a few tricks I learned along the way too that I share with leaders. I'm actually coaching someone. We had a session Thursday talking about this very topic and just the concept of turning his teams off at 6:30 at night. Because when people can see your green dot on Teams that you're available, they don't hesitate to reach out. And some people like quiet time at the end of the day. You are entitled to have some time to get your work done. And I think, the key with any new leader with a team is you can't initially do that. You've got to learn the team, learn the process, dig in, spend the time. Once you get comfortable and you've started to build that rapport and you find what your working rhythm is with the people that work for you, I think it's a lot easier to set some boundaries. And I say boundaries with like a 90%, if you're lucky, adherence rate, because things go wrong and people still need help and there are emergencies. And I always made it clear that this is how I prefer to operate. Clearly, if there is a 4-alarm fire, you may come see me, things like that. But people get used to you being available when you make yourself really available. And there were a couple tricks. So the first one I learned is teaching people how to solve their own problems. Start coming to me with your ideas on what the solution could be. Because it's really tiring coming up with the answers all day, every day. And I don't necessarily have the answers all the time. I'm going to think it through. I might consult with somebody, but there's also more than one way to skin a cat, so to speak. So what I started to do, and I had a manager that did this to me, so this is where I learned it. Come to me with a possible solution for your problem. And ultimately, I'm going to bless it or ask some questions or maybe redirect you. And over time, guess what? You might be able to solve your own problems and not even need me, right? Teaching people how to think on their own, which I really loved. And that worked really well for me with my staff. And it only takes a few times of you asking them, what do you think you should do? Or how do you think you should solve? Which is so annoying when you're on the other side of that, but they learn.
It's like, this is why I came to you. I don't want to have to think of it.
Exactly. With your managers though, so who I'm accountable to, you feel like it's really hard to tell your boss that you have a boundary. We spoke early on about our work hours, especially when I interviewed for the job. I don't start at 6:30. I like to say I start at 8. And if I'm online at 7, that's Robin's hour. I found when I got overwhelmed with work or I had too many competing priorities, I would just ask for what are her top 3 things she needs to get done. Or I would say, as she gave me things, is this a today thing or is it a this week? Like, let me figure out what I need to do today based on the things that are so important to you. So if you can help set timelines for me, then I know how to make the most out of my day.
Yeah, those are great questions for somebody to ask.
And, that was pretty easy for me because that's not threatening as an employee to ask a boss. Yes, I can get on this. I have these 4 things. Does this need to come to the top? I'll stop what I'm doing. Or is this something potentially that can wait? I always asked for timelines when I was really busy. If I had the time to accommodate it, no problem.
Yeah. Clarity. It's the number one thing in communication. And that's where it can go so wrong. Just in that scenario, you have a manager and the employee in the office and they're discussing the 150 things, that have to get done. And if you're the type of manager where you're like, oh, well, as long as you just get it done at some time, and that's not really helpful if you're not sharing exactly when it is. I mean, if it's true that, the deadline is 2 weeks from today. So rather than saying, oh, well, if you get around to it in the next couple of weeks, well, that's not really going to be very helpful for me. But if I know, oh, the deadline is absolutely 100% 2 weeks from today, now I can organize my calendar around that so I can fit it into the other 150 things that have to be done. Yeah. I know a lot of people who are like that. They're just kind of like, oh, in a couple of days. It's like,
well, it's even challenging when you work in an environment where everything is what my mom always referred to as like instant gratification. Everything's like right now.
Yeah.
There's only one thing that can come first. Something has to be second. So I think that's important. And with people, when they start infringing potentially on your time or your boundary, I would always just say, you know what, I'm not able to accommodate that today, but you'll be the first phone call I make tomorrow.
That's right.
Or it'll be the first thing I do in the morning.
Yeah.
And I felt like as a manager, I tried to give good deadlines to my team too. When I would ask for their help, I'd be like, this is not a today thing. Put it on your list. We also kept project plans. So everybody every week kept a running list of all the things they were working on. And we dropped it in a shared book so we could all see progress. So we didn't have to spend one-on-one time going through an Excel spreadsheet of all your projects. They just sent it to me every week.
Yeah.
Things like that I could just monitor and then inquire as needed. So that was a really helpful tool.
Use the technology that's available to us. It's so incredibly helpful. We use Google Sheets and Google Docs a lot, where we can all just kind of log in and look at it at the same time and go back and forth. It saves on so much time being able to use the comment feature. There are things in place that can help that communication go a little more smoothly. But yeah, the clarity of it is so incredibly important. Just this morning, I use Eisenhower's matrix. Have you ever heard of that?
No, I haven't.
So
write that down.
It does come from Dwight Eisenhower. He used to use 4 quadrants.
Okay.
And, in quadrant 1, he would look at it, is this urgent or not urgent? And then in the other axis, he would look at, is this important or not important? So in quadrant 1, if it's urgent and it's important, this is going to go in the quadrant that's labeled as do. So these are the things I need to do now. And then if it's urgent, but it's not necessarily important, these are the things that I'm going to delay just a little bit. Like maybe I need to put them on my calendar so that I can get to them after I'm done with the do. And then if it's important, but it's not urgent, these are the things that I can delegate. Let me find somebody who's really good at this. I'm going to delegate to them. And if it's not important and it's not urgent, it's not something that's going to help you move forward in whatever it is you need to do, then delete it. Get rid of it. Don't even look at it anymore. Just kind of throw that in the trash. And I will tell you that really helps, because I will have my to-do list like a lot of people, but when that to-do list gets to be a certain number of things that I start feeling the anxiety, building up in my chest, like, oh, look at all the things. How am I going to handle this? And then I get out my quadrants and I start putting them in the appropriate quadrant. And then I can just sit back and go, okay, all right, these are the 3 things that I'm going to do today. This is all I'm going to worry about in this moment. And it's so incredibly helpful to be able to organize that. And then it helps me with everybody else.
I love that. I worked with a coach. So I had my own coach, and he shared in sort of a different format about the 2 concepts of urgency and importance. And so I wondered where he got it. Now I know.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you, Dwight Eisenhower. We appreciate your brains.
I love the idea of trying to determine what you can really delegate. I think that's something leaders really struggle with in one of 2 ways. Either they love to delegate everything, or they want to hold on to everything because they feel like they can do it better than the rest of their team, or they don't have time to teach and show. And my theory was always, it's just the initial extra time. You put it in up front to teach. It will pay itself back in dividends. You just have to spend that time up front.
Okay. So that's what you're doing to try to encourage them, because it can become a bottleneck. If you're the one who has to have your hands on everything, there's going to come a time where just things are not going to get done because it's still waiting on you to give the okay on that. So you recommend that they spend a lot of time just teaching others how to take care of this and exactly how it should be taken care of, the things that they want, the expectations, and just baby steps?
Absolutely. And I think, it depends on the skill. So I'll use my last job as a quick example. I was doing performance management. So we were building scorecards, and then I was in charge of building comp plans. But we sent out tons of data to leaders across the company. I was doing it for everybody until I brought a team in and taught them how I built things, where to pull it. But we built, checks and balances. Initially, it was they would do it and they would send it to me to check. So we could get accustomed to it, because when you send something as important as data, you make any mistakes, people start to question your data now. So you have to be really, really careful and compliant and check your quality. And so it was, you give small pieces, you let them get to work on it. And over time, you build that trust and you teach the skills, and then you can teach more. I got copied on all of their work so I could still look at it. But work is a little different than communication too, and it depends on the audience. So to me, everything is just teaching in small steps. When you have to, let's say you want them to communicate to the entire senior leadership team, but the employee on your team, it's still, lower in rank, if you will. They're not comfortable. They're not always thinking about dialogue. They're not thinking about how it comes off and punctuation. And just like the things that we take for granted. Not everybody's written communication is stellar. And sometimes that requires double checking and making sure how they're communicating and the language is acceptable. When I think back to my very first job, and I'm going to date myself, we did memos.
Oh, the memos.
And I would type them, and my manager would have to approve it. And red ink would come back with margins, whatever. That's how I learned how to write professionally in a way that would be received well. So same things. But when you take on more and more as a leader, your bandwidth is finite. So your options are, right? You can hire people, you can delegate, or you bury yourself. So you've got to find a way. And so that's where learning how to be a good hiring manager is really important too. But that's where, yes, building your team to support you so you can successfully delegate in the long run is critical. That's building scale, right?
Yeah. So if you are a leader and you are thinking about, okay, I need to build this team. I need to bring together a group of people who are going to help me achieve this goal. When they are interviewing, for different positions, have you talked to them about how do you actually interview in a way that you can kind of pinpoint the things that you're looking for? If I'm wanting to fill a certain position, are there certain things I might want to look for, during that interview? Do you ever coach them on how they're interviewing people so that they can become better at discerning who might be the right person for the job versus just, let's just pick one? And then
absolutely. Small business owners, this is something they struggle with. People that have worked for others that are just starting on their own, right? They're not used to all the things required to have a successful team, even if it's just a couple of people. So a word we talked about earlier, preparation. I have interview questions that I create for every role that are designed to dig into what they might know because of what's important to performing well in that role. The phrase behavioral interviewing is always what comes to mind. So you do not want to ask questions that can allow your candidate to just answer yes or no.
Right.
Because while we wish everybody was truthful all the time, when you want a job, you might say you have skills you don't. You might say you have experience in things you don't. So I write all of my questions where they are open-ended and they have to come up with examples. And, you love the phrase, tell me about a time. It's situations that they can describe with detail. So you get a sense for, do they have this skill? Tell me about a time you had conflict in the workplace with one of your peers. What was it about? What were your first steps? How long did you let it go on before you decided to take act? Did you go to your manager? All the questions you can ask about things that are important to that role. I love, one of my favorite questions is asking people if I were to call their manager today, which always kind of puts them, back
like, what?
What would they tell me are your best attributes, or what have you improved in the most? And what are they going to tell me you're still working on?
Yeah.
And that working on or your weakness always seems to trip people up. They're always so scared to tell the truth.
Right.
I actually really want to know not the bad thing that you turn into a good thing.
Yeah.
That's how people, I think, are coached. I'm a little different. I really want to know, what do you think is your weakness?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
I
I'll
love
answer
how you
that
phrase that though. If I were to call your manager, what would they tell me about your how well you did, or what are some of the things that you're working on? Just I think just phrasing that in that way gets you to think about it in a different way. I do think a lot of people do get stumped when you ask them that question about strengths and weaknesses. Because if you give them a framework, how does my manager look at me? Or how would a former manager look at me in this aspect? I think that that's actually a really great way to ask that question, because it does force them from the outside in. Yeah. What were some of the things? What was my performance like?
Mhm. Well, and it's the growth mindset too. I mean, when you are hiring for roles, we get really pigeonholed into they have to have this certain experience to be really good in this role.
Mhm.
I have done that too, admittedly. So that's one of my flaws. I was looking for certain things in my earlier years of trying to hire, but
Right.
I had leaders who put me into jobs that I wasn't sure I was ready for.
Mhm.
And they were like, we know you can do this.
Yeah.
And I thrived based on just their confidence in me. And
Mhm.
so I've tried to pay that forward too. You find someone that maybe doesn't have everything you're looking for, but has some of these core skills, and you can see hunger
Mhm.
and you can see discipline, then you can teach a lot of things.
Yeah.
But you can't teach motivation and you can't teach drive.
Mhm.
And so people that have a core set of skills, even if it's not, how to use this computer program, or maybe their communication needs a little tweak, there are things you can always teach. But,
That's
ability and attitude, we know
That's right.
those
And
are
to be
inherent.
able to model that, you had mentioned former leaders who have been, so influential in how you move about this world. I remember when I worked for Fairfax County Public Schools many, many years ago, I was a communication specialist there. And my boss there, to this day, I still think she is one of she should write a leadership book. She did end up becoming superintendent of the school system, but I had interviewed for the position that frankly I didn't think I was qualified for, but I applied for it anyway. And I
Mhm.
had to come in and I had to do this presentation. And it was down to me and this other woman who already worked there. And she had already had her PhD. Like she had a huge leg up on what I had to offer. But they liked how I did the presentation. And later on, when I went into her office and she made, the offer, and then she told me how much the position was going to pay. And I was like, okay. And I think she could tell that I was still so young in this. She
Mhm.
took that moment and she said, this is a pay range and you can ask for more
Oh.
if you think you deserve more. And I was like, that never would have occurred to me in a million years. And I was like, really? And so, what a lesson to learn, though, for someone, coming into an industry and not very familiar with it, how things operate. That was such a pivotal moment for me in recognizing, wow, this is something like she really was looking out for me.
Mhm.
And so to this day, I have so much admiration for her because every single time, I would come into the office, I had something new to learn from her. So it's, don't underestimate the power of those conversations that you can have and just be giving, of the knowledge that you have.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because as you're talking, I'm thinking of this parallel theme that many people, and I won't specify which gender here, but
Mhm.
are not comfortable in
Mhm.
the art of negotiating,
Yeah. Yep.
right? It's your self-worth, it's your own
Yep.
discomfort. And
Mhm.
HR representatives have reported how many people just accept the salary and the package
Yeah.
that's offered. I've coached people on, career counseling and how to manage the interview process for
Yeah.
that reason.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
what's the worst thing they say? No.
Yeah. And if they say no, okay, it's no. But if you don't make the ask, it's definitely going to be no.
I know. It's a funny phenomenon. And I think it's something I
Mhm.
struggled with as a younger leader too. It's always the imposter syndrome. It's knowing your value and your worth and,
Yeah.
being willing to stand up for yourself and what you believe in and ask for those
Mhm.
things.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think another lesson there that I learned from her is don't assume that the people who are working for you know. Just don't assume that they know whatever it is that you're thinking about, and just like the pay range is just one example. There are just so many things that we work on in any given day. If you just assume that they know, I think you're inviting trouble. And then, and I think that builds trust as well. If you just take that moment to let them know that you want them to know these answers because it's really going to help them downrange, right?
Well, and making them feel comfortable
Yeah.
because things you do every day that are so second nature to you. I mean,
Yeah.
my husband is a small business owner. We talk about this all the time. When you create material or you do things for the public and you think they know the inner workings, the lingo, people that you need to write things, we always joke like for a second grader, but you need to write things and present things in a way that people can understand that know nothing about your business. And
Mhm.
that's a really interesting point. When you start talking in certain circles, you have to make people feel comfortable to ask questions and to what I call like set the table. Like, here's the context of what we're going to talk about. If anyone doesn't understand, let's just cover it now. And
Mhm.
people are always hesitant, right? They don't want to ask the question that might make them look like they don't know what they're talking about. How many times have you sat in a room with senior leaders who would say, "Can you back that up? I really don't get what that." Like the senior leaders can do it all the time. I've seen
Right.
that. But it's the
Yeah.
ones, that are on the front lines and the entry level positions that are like, "No, I can't raise my hand."
Yeah. Yeah.
I
I
find
can't
that
ask that
fascinating.
question.
But the senior leaders have no problem. I don't really understand what that means. That doesn't
Yeah.
make any sense to me.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you're a leader out there, make sure that you are setting up the communication climate in your office in such a way that your employees feel comfortable and
Yes.
confident that they can ask the questions. It's just going to benefit everybody.
Well, the other thing I heard that I really liked, Marshall Goldsmith tells some stories in some of his coaching online about when you're soliciting feedback from your team and you're trying to pursue more collaboration, to make that environment safe, you
Mhm.
thank people for their ideas.
Mm.
In the back of your
Mhm.
mind, you may think, I'm never going to use this, or this
Mhm.
probably wouldn't work, but you never say that publicly.
Yeah.
It's always, thank you for that suggestion. We're going to take that
Mhm.
under consideration. Or thank you for sharing your opinion. That's a great thought. Like just always making people feel welcome to talk because you never know what that might solicit in a domino effect from
Mm.
somebody else who might have a game changing idea.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you shut them down immediately or embarrass them in front of the group, if it's done publicly like that, then what you're going to do is the next time you have this brainstorming session and you're asking everyone for their
Yep.
input, they're not going to give it.
Nope. It'll be crickets.
Yeah. And they could have the best idea ever. The next $1 billion idea could be
Yep.
stuck in their head, but they're like, nope, I'm going to keep my mouth shut because last time I didn't like how I was treated. I was embarrassed or, whatever. So it really doesn't do anybody any good to do that in public. I think that's a great piece of advice right there.
It's always easier to poke holes in people's things. It is
It
harder
is,
to
isn't it?
be a generator.
Yeah.
When you create a presentation or you make a suggestion, everybody's got an opinion when they look at your things or they hear what you're suggesting. It does take a little more courage to be the generator of the documents, the ideas.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
think it's always a good place to start too, because you
Mhm.
need people that can do that. And then others can weigh in. And I have worked in groups where you get people that they ask to take the exact opposite opinion, tell us all the things that could go wrong, just to help think through an entire solution, which I think
Yeah.
is really fascinating,
Mhm.
especially
Yeah.
if it's the person that had the idea and it's
Mhm.
a big one. Okay, now you're the one that has to poke holes in it, and this group gets to decide why it's going to be good. So you have to sort of attempt to defend your own idea by thinking about the complete other side.
Yeah, I think it's great because you're not really aware of your own blind spots until you're forced to pay attention to different perspectives. And I think that's a great exercise to have for any department, any organization. We like to sit down and have those skull sessions where it's like, okay, we're going to rewrite the mission statement. We're going to rewrite our value statements, and I want everybody to have input. Or if there's some problem that has to be resolved, to be able to sit down in the group and hear from all of those different perspectives. But if you are forced to really have to think about, what could go wrong in this? Let's sit on this for just a moment. Let this marinate for a little bit, and try to come up with some different ways that you think that maybe this isn't the best thing that we could do at this moment.
I think one of my other favorite things in corporate when I do coaching is we have a tendency to want to put Band-Aids on things.
Yeah.
And not try to solve the long-term solution. And the Band-Aids aren't always the best. And to think long-term, maybe it will cost a little more. Maybe there's technology involved. Maybe it's people. Like, who knows what the elements might be. But sometimes Band-Aid solutions just create other problems. And I think it's really important to try to do that whole champion, challenger, pro, like think through what the real solutions should be.
Yeah. In public speaking, we call that mental dialogue. So if you could have a mental dialogue, if you're going to create an argument for something, try to anticipate, well, what is the audience thinking about that? If you have people in the audience who are not going to agree with this, what is that disagreement? What are they going to be thinking in that moment in time? And so that way you can craft your message in a way that you can address that concern, right then and there in your presentation. So I like the idea of, if you have a group sitting down, play the back and forth, have you do it. And I think it's a great exercise because it does force you to have those different perspectives.
Which is so important. We can't get stuck in a group think, especially when we talked about hiring people with different experiences, different perspectives. It's a balancing act because that's important. And then the dynamic of the personality in a team. Yeah. So it's a combination of trying to look at the persona and the experience, because I know when I'm a leader, if I'm not good at something and it's my weakness, I would like to hire somebody that is really strong there. That makes my team better. Yeah. You don't want to be threatened by your team. You want to celebrate their success. You want, and the best thing they can do is potentially you work for them and you've built such a great relationship. It doesn't matter anyway. That's right. Or the best compliment is you take off for a week or two, or you potentially leave a position because you relocate, which I did, and that team runs smoothly without you. Yeah. That to me is the best compliment. I don't want it to fall apart when I'm not there. I want it to thrive. Yeah, because you did your job in making sure that everybody is able to perform the way they need to perform. Absolutely. Yeah, that's great. Well, Robin, we've already talked over an hour now. I think we did a good job, though. We did a very good job at pretty much focusing on communication in the workplace and in leadership and managers. I'm pretty proud of us for staying focused in that area, because we could very easily go in 100 different directions when we're talking about communication. Indeed. Yeah. Indeed. Yeah. So the hour went by way too fast. There are so many other things that we can talk about. So I will have you back on the show so we can dive into some of those other topics, because I really want to hear what you have to say about those. But before we wrap it up, is there anything that you would like to say to the audience? Any parting words of wisdom, if you will? Yes, actually, I have a good one. It's one you and I talked about, and I think it's something that resonated with you in my chapter, as a matter of fact. So we have this saying in my household over here, and it can be applied to anything, whether it's personal, professional, relationships. You make time for the things you value.
That's right.
And so it's, I'm too busy. I can't call this person. I can't spend time with this person. I can't help this person. Anything you value, you will make time for. And that even goes with, do you prioritize your health and wellness? Is it your relationships? Is it walking whatever it is in life? That phrase has served me so well as my true north to keep me on track for what are the things I value, first of all. How do I make sure I have time in almost every day to act upon those things?
Yeah, I cannot tell you how many times I had that phrase stuck in my head, especially over the past several months. So that's where we'll pick up the next time I have you on the show, because yeah, that phrase right there, it really did help with some of the personal things, that
Yes.
were going on. So I thank you for sharing that. Yeah. And I know somebody else is listening to this, and I think it'll be an incredible help to them as well.
Good. I hope so.
Yeah. All right. Well, then that is it for today. Oh, my dog is scratching on the door. So, that's what we're hearing. If you're hearing any scratches on the door. So why don't you share with the listeners how they can get in touch with you?
Oh, sure. So you can contact me directly on my website, which is my name, www.robin, which is ROBIN, Lukason, LUKASON.com. I'm also on LinkedIn, so that's also my name. I'm also on Instagram, Robin ML Coach. So you can find me lots of different places, and you can drop me a note or an email through my website. If you feel like we might be a fit for coaching or you're interested in my services, it's all out there, and you can connect with me that way.
Outstanding. I'll make sure all that information's available in the show notes. All right. Thanks again, Robin, for being a guest on the show. This has been such a great conversation for me, and I'll be sure to have you back again.
Great. I look forward to it.
All right.
Thanks, Jen.
Everybody, have a great rest of your day. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating and a review.